Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey! Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 11th, 2022. It is, in fact, time for another show, and I didn't have a whole show actually planned today. As a matter of fact, I still don't, and we're going to go with something completely different. Well, as you know, it is high school spring break this week, or at least in our neck of the woods, and that means for our high school junior a couple of trips to college campuses for visits this week. We had that all planned. I mentioned it to you last week. And then, well, as it happens, Greg was so excited and had such a large raft of stories and such an impressive raft of stories that all ready to go, that I thought, hey, maybe the thing to do here is to do a live 1 hour show. My plan was to do 3 1-hour special short podcasts just to keep you company for the week. Then back to regular live broadcasts for Thursday and Good Friday. And I had it, well, I wasn't going to say I had it all ready to go. I had 2 podcasts ready to go. Well, I had 2 podcasts recorded, 1 ready to go. That was for today. I got all set. I sent it to Scott and everything. And I don't know. Anyway, I saw this impressive list of things and was all set to tell Greg, hey, we're not doing a show today. And I said, well, maybe we'll just do it differently. And we'll do the 1 hour thing, but we'll just do it live. We're doing it live. And we'll get to all these other stories that would otherwise have fallen by the wayside until Thursday. 2 big stories that I did have set to go with pre-recorded stuff will bring you, I guess, tomorrow. You have to recut the intro, although it would be funny just to run the intro tomorrow as is. Hey, it's Monday morning. How you doing? Completely wrong, but only insiders will know that. But yes, for those of you waking up this morning, I guess we could say this. Those of you waking up ready for me to jump on the Jared Kushner and Don Jr. stories, what if we waited until tomorrow and did that, even though I got excited too and did that over the weekend? And we cover everything else that's going on around the world. And, I don't know, some other parts of the country probably as well. And Greg Dworkin can do that. So, I don't know. We'll jump out of the way. We'll do it with no break also. So an extra bonus 2 minutes or so, plus 30 seconds on either side with the annoying music that is gone. And we'll just jump straight to the let's get the hell out of here thing on, I guess at 9:57 instead of 9:58, playing our 1 minute break music. We'll play our let's get the hell out of here break. So here's Greg, all ready to go. I said let's get underway. It's got a lot of stories to squeeze in, even in an hour. So let's get right to it. Good morning, Greg. I didn't expect we'd be doing this.
Well,
but,
you know
hey.
what happened. I mean, apparently I had 9% of today's material. And having sent it to you, you abruptly decided to ask me to join the Kagro in the morning board.
Yes, right.
And, I was telling Justice this morning, what if I agreed to do the show? David got it all set up, and then I decided not to show.
Yeah, right. Oh, we have a whole
that would be an Elon
out here today. Yep. And I have actually seen a lot of interesting takes on that out there. I don't think how it would really have changed Twitter that much, but everyone was getting all upset. But I don't know. He's a weirdo, and he decided to flake on it and not join the board, which is fine.
The 2 best takes I saw, one was from my Twitter friend Hal Sparks, who's very funny, who said, as a board member, it's mildly more difficult to engage in pump and dump stock schemes.
Yes.
Mildly,
you think?
So pump up the stock because I'm going to join the board, and then as soon as the stock goes up, I sell it all and say, I decided not to join the board.
Yeah, all right. Well, there was already a problem with the way he bought or sold or something the stock.
Right.
Well,
the other problem is, his Tesla group is not doing as well with financial stories. But who's paying attention to financial stories? Look at that squirrel. He's going to join the Twitter board.
Space. Whatever. Yeah. And some claims from his fans. I thought some very interesting claims from his fans saying, oh, now, I don't know, whatever. I don't remember what the scenario they were trying to set up was, but they were pushing him as an African American. I can't believe people are protesting an African American joining the board at Tesla. Well, He was born in Africa. That's true. But yeah, I guess we gotta refine that definition.
Not only that, he's a sharecropper.
Right. Born the son of a poor. Well, I think somebody tried to float that for Teresa Heinz once. Teresa Heinz Carey, because I think she was born in Madagascar, and everybody was kind of like, a little insensitive, not going to do that.
Yeah, especially because, like, where's Madagascar? Show me the map.
Right. Well, yeah, no one knows.
So here's what I did want to talk about.
Good movie, though. Yes.
First of all, I think a big story in the Times that doesn't involve Hunter Biden or the Trump kids, and the idea that the Trump kids are out-and-out crooks and thieves.
All true.
But let's talk about Hunter.
Okay.
Is just like the most clear and ridiculous example of media just having lost their way. Or you could say, well, it's not that they concentrate on inflation and therefore drive down Biden's support. It's that Americans are concerned about inflation, and they just reflect what Americans think. And that's mostly true. But on the other hand, if you want a clear example, Americans aren't clamoring for Hunter Biden stories.
Okay.
Right? The media is just doing it because I don't know why. But the actual crook, thievery, knavery, breaking the law stuff are the Trump kids, and they're big. And so you'll cover that tomorrow.
Yes.
But what I wanted to cover today is January 6th panel has evidence for criminal referral of Trump, but splits on sending. And I want to do the nuance here. Despite concluding that it is enough evidence, the committee is concerned that making a referral to the Justice Department would backfire by politicizing the investigation into the Capitol riot. And a lot of this is being brought up by Democrats. And whereas, as somebody pointed out on Twitter, the Times frames it as kind of a moral issue. It's not at all. Everybody on the panel agrees it has enough evidence for a criminal referral.
That's true.
This is a tactics question. Since it's so obvious that that's the case, and a judge already said Trump's probably guilty of felonies, why do they have to? What does it gain them other than shifting the discussion of Trump's criminality to whether or not the committee should have referred? If they don't refer, then that's not a talking point. It's a tactical decision.
Yes.
And he's still a crook, and he's still probably committed felonies, and Justice Department is going to do whatever they do, with or without the referral. The referral has absolutely zero weight in terms of what the Justice Department does.
True.
And it's not like they didn't know about it unless a formal referral is made. That things are going to be televised, the hearings, everything. It's a strictly tactical decision.
Yeah, I did finally come to
argue
view
either
it that
way,
way.
but it's not a moral decision. It's not a failing. It's not weakness. It's not a split committee. It's none of those things.
Well, it might be a split committee, but they're not going to fight over it. I mean, they have different opinions of it, but yeah, ultimately, I know. At first, the feeling is I can't believe they're not going to do anything about it. But I guess once you realize that the referral is also not really doing anything about it.
Or as the Times calls it, the debate centers on whether making a referral, a largely symbolic act, would backfire politically, tainting the Justice Department's expanding investigation. And people say, you can't taint Republicans. It's not like you're going to get them mad and they're somehow going to retaliate. They're vindictive and they are who they are. That's all true. But that's not the point. The point is how it looks to the public, not how it looks to Republicans.
Well, that's certainly true. There's nothing you can do to make them not attack you over it or try to politicize it. That part is still all true. And you got to do what you got to do regardless. But it is worth spending some time thinking about the fact that, a referral then it sits on the desk and they go, look at that. They think he's a criminal. So do we. Now, and it doesn't speed them up. It doesn't force them to do anything.
It doesn't do anything. And then here's another line that the Times throws in just to obfuscate things. Despite concluding that they have enough evidence to refer Mr. Trump for obstructing a congressional proceeding and conspiring to defraud the American people, some on the committee are questioning whether there's any need to make a referral. The headline is that they've concluded that there's enough evidence to refer Mr. Trump for obstructing a congressional proceeding and conspiring to defraud the American people, full stop. The rest is garbage.
Oh, well, what will we do with it?
Well, but they're not making that the full banner headline. It deserves to be. Anymore than they are about the Trump kids being crooks.
No.
That's a editorial decision by the people who own the Times.
Yeah. Horrible people, apparently.
Pretty much.
I don't know. It's
and they do things really well.
Some
Some things really well. I mean, it's an accurate report. And nobody can argue that it's an inaccurate report. But the weight and the way it's framed is subtle but real.
Oh. Yes. And they ruined Wordle.
Now, here's something that they do well.
This is true.
Interview people, and get stuff on the record. This is Robert Draper, old hand.
They're good at this.
And he's interviewing Fiona Hill. This was Trump pulling a Putin.
Yeah, what is this?
Right? And amid the current crisis, Fiona Hill and other former advisors are connecting President Trump's pressure campaign on Ukraine to January 6th. They're ready to talk. And they go back and they think about how things work. Now, Fiona Hill's an interesting character because not only is she basically as straightforward as they come.
Yes.
But she's conservative. She worked for W and has W stories about Cheney. In the Oval Office, Hill recalls describing a scene that's not been previously reported. She told Bush and Cheney that offering a membership path to Ukraine and Georgia could be problematic, while Bush's appetite for promoting the spread of democracy hadn't been dampened by the Iraq War. And by the way, in the article, Bush never listens to anything she says, but treats her with respect.
Okay.
And doesn't mind differing opinions. Cheney, not so much. President Putin of Russia viewed NATO with suspicion and was vehemently opposed to neighboring countries joining its ranks. So this goes back a long, long way. There's no interesting provocation that happened in the last 6 months that made Putin do this. This has always been his thing. He would regard it as a provocation, which was one reason the U.S. key NATO allies opposed the idea. Cheney took umbrage at Hill's assessment. You're telling me you're opposed to freedom and democracy, and he walked out.
Well, why stay?
And Bush laughed and said, he's just yanking your chain. Go on with what you were saying. And that pretty much sums up, what was going on in the administration at that time. So Bush, being overconfident and having a huge ego, thought he could win over the other NATO leaders. It went really poorly, and then Putin invaded Georgia.
Nope.
So Hill says it was the worst of all possible words. As one of the foremost experts on Putin and current unofficial advisor to the Biden administration, she's already made a specialty of issuing warnings about the Russian leader. She basically told all the presidents he's thin-skinned, don't insult them, and so naturally most of them did exactly that. Trump didn't. That's the one thing he listened to. We said openly, she said, don't diss this guy. He's thin-skinned and quick to take insults. So Obama used to insult him, and lately Biden's been insulting him, which is a different issue altogether. Biden is trying to look tough for the American people because that's what's called for in a midterm.
Yes.
And that's different than a provocation that he's already acted on, so it's too late to worry about that. Basically, she says of her experience trying to steer policy during her 2 years in the Trump White House, Hill says it's extraordinarily difficult. That was the case for those of us who were serving in the administration with the hopes of pushing back against the Russians. And along the way, some people kind of lost their sense of self. We used to have this running shtick in our office at the NSC. As a kid, I was a great fan of Tolkien. So in the Trump administration, we talk about the ring and the fear of becoming Gollum.
Okay.
Obsessing over my precious. That was like the power of being in the White House. And I did see a lot of people slipping into that. And when I asked Hill to name names, she said, the ones who wouldn't testify in his impeachment hearing. So, that was well done. And that's the kind of interview the Times does well, framing the whole thing as, this is just a argument between the two factions as to whether or not Trump in fact committed treason and tried to overthrow the government. It's not a both sides thing, and they just have never been able to get over that. And here's yet the latest example. So that's my rant about the Times. Not that they're inaccurate. They get good information, but the framing forced upon them, especially in their political division, is just awful.
Well, that's a good way of putting it, right? I mean, you can't abandon them entirely. There's just too much good material that can be used well. To just decide not to use it well. But they do produce it, so you can't turn away. Well, that's a good explanation for what's going on.
Meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about some international news, because I think that's important. This one from The Economist.
Looking around.
Emmanuel Macron will battle Marine Le Pen for the French presidency.
Yes, French president.
Rock'em robots. The two topped the first round of the election in a repeat of 2017. So Macron gets 27.6 in the first round, and I think it's April 24th for the second round. It's in 2 weeks. At the first round vote on April 10th, Macron came in first with 27.6. Mm-hmm. Le Pen ran him a close second with 23.4.
Yeah.
And the third place was a leftist, Mélenchon, radical left firebrand. He got 22.0, almost beat out Le Pen, which is kind of interesting. Eliminated on Sunday was Eric Zemmour, who is, as we mentioned on the show, another rightist who was trying to take Le Pen's place. But he was once convicted of incitement to racial hatred. He got 7.1%.
Yeah, for that. All right. I guess in the general. And us, they have primaries.
Valérie Pécresse, the center-right Republican candidate, in fifth place with 4.8% of the vote. That's like the normal Republican Party equivalent.
They still have some. I guess one or two, right? If Fred Upton ran, that's what would happen.
Yeah. The first round vote was a sober reminder that on Macron's watch, the populist vote has not lost any appeal. In the first round, 58% of voters backed the populist, nationalist, or radical candidate on either left or right. And turnout was down a little bit, 75% compared to 78%. But what's interesting is that I think just like last time, except for Zemmour, who's the rightist, everybody else who lost said, I lost. I'm sorry I lost. Absolutely, to all my followers, please do not vote for Le Pen.
Yeah.
And that's how Macron wound up winning by a fairly large margin the last time in the runoff. This time it's expected to be a lot closer. He's got like a 5-point lead. Or as people like to say, he's got about the same lead Hillary had. So by no means is it a sure thing. And what I'm most interested is to see whether Mélenchon, the leftist, comes out and says, I not only not want you to vote for Le Pen, that's a given. Don't go anywhere near her. I want you to vote for Macron. Don't sit home. That's what I'm waiting for.
Okay.
Because the biggest problem isn't that they'll vote for Le Pen, it's that they won't vote.
Yeah. Got to get them to getting out the French vote. Not the French toast, the French vote.
Now, there's one debate between now and then.
Toast.
In 2017, Le Pen did terribly. That was part of the reason she lost. The others is that the other backers decided to go with Macron. This time, polls say that fewer voters will follow that course. Indeed, the narrowing of second-round polls suggests it's Macron whom many voters want to dislodge. The Economist polling average now suggests the final result of 52 for Macron, 48 for Le Pen. Even historically modest error in the polls would be enough to overturn the president's lead. But don't forget, errors can go the other way, too. He has some momentum because he won the first round. And Le Pen's going to draw support not only from Zemmour, but from voters whose first choice was Mélenchon and Pécresse. And that's why it's so important that those people really make it clear, you not only can't vote for Le Pen, I want you to vote for Macron. They have to just come out and say it.
Okay.
Right? Macron, on the other hand, is arrogant, cold.
Yeah.
Reminds me, what was his name? Valerie Giscard d'Estaing. I don't know. France has a number of leaders who were raised in the elite and don't pay attention to the populace, which is why they have a radical left and a populist right. And Macron has to, engage. Now, one of the things he wants to do is raise the pension age from 62 to 65, which will save France a lot of money and piss off a lot of people.
Okay.
Very unpopular. And as The Economist notes, despite a decent track record managing COVID and bringing down unemployment and revitalizing the EU, you'd think that'd be enough track record to run on. But no. He has not managed to capture the national mood. Does that sound familiar?
Sure. Yeah, it kind of does. But at least, I don't know where this idea that the French people are unhappy with cold, distant leaders. I don't get it.
Well, they tend to throw out, whoever's in.
Yeah, well.
French presidents these days tend to have a term. Then they go with somebody else.
Okay. Well,
whoever it is. So, Macron's got some headwinds, but he's also got some momentum because of the vote. All and really, it's a question of the other candidates and how enthusiastically they back Macron in order to stop Le Pen, which I think is quite reasonable. In the U.S., you might put it as, I never vote for anybody, but I always vote against somebody.
Well, yeah, all right.
And there's a lot of that. So hopefully that'll prevail. Macron will eke it out. And I sort of care how big the win is, but I'm most interested in that it's a win. That's more important.
Sure. Okay. Well, we'll take it if it comes, and hopefully it does. And all right. So cold, distant leaders, big deal. You've had it before, and you'll deal with it again. And if you need to chop his head off later, I suppose that's an option that's open to you. Historically, I would recommend against it, but get past the election first. I think you guys can handle it. Okay.
Right. Now, I don't have this in the lineup, not only because there wasn't enough room, but because it's an audio. But Sarah Longwell over at Bulwark did an interview with Robert Gibbs over a focus group she did of Democratic and independent voters who voted for the Democrats and about their ongoing angst about how things are going. And Gibbs described it as running in mud. You do everything right, and just the general environment is just so bad that you feel like you're not getting anywhere. So you double down, and sometimes it works, and sometimes you just get stuck in more mud. And what he talked about is, just the general feelings of I'm just hanging on. You think COVID's getting better. Now we hear about another variant. You think that the job market is just turning around. Now we go to the store and price of eggs, price of gas, inflation. These are all big deals to us. And it's not like everything's so bad or terrible right now. It's that there's this uneasy feeling that things could go either way. It could really get better or it could really get worse. And I'm blaming the person in the White House because he's not giving me a feeling of, oh, it's definitely going to get better. I'm fighting for you. That was basically their message. And that's I want them to be tougher stuff, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, like with, insulting Putin before a war doesn't work. Insulting him after a war, fine. That's what people want.
Okay. What about congratulating him? Do not do that.
Well, again, that's voting against as opposed to voting for. And that's just the general background. And that's, it's just as true in France as it is in the U.S. And that's why Macron isn't running away with it. And people have to understand that it isn't enough to sit back and say, oh, my goodness, this Le Pen person is a fascist who likes Putin. That should be disqualifying. It's never disqualifying. People say that's nice. I'm worried about myself and what's going on here.
Whatever happened to it makes me think about the one other thing I ever knew about French politics in any way, shape, or form. The Yellow Jacket people who are going to revolutionize everything, but they have revolutions every week.
Mélenchon.
So, yeah.
That's Mélenchon's
is that him?
people. So,
is that his? They're his people? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Firebrand
that's the answer.
So, what has to happen is he's got to convince them to go to the polls and vote for Macron.
Okay.
Not easy.
Yeah, maybe new jackets. Maybe possibly.
Different color. I don't know.
Okay. Well, at any rate, I was just wondering because so far their political influence disappeared from my radar screen because I don't look at France. That's
here's an ABC poll, for example. Good news, bad news. Most Americans blame Vladimir Putin and oil companies for high gas prices.
What?
But they're also more likely to blame Democrats and Republicans.
Then ice cream people? What? I mean, who else do you blame?
Well, Democrats, the guy in the White House.
Oh, yeah. Well, all right. Sure. But more people are, what did you say, more are blaming Vladimir Putin and oil companies than
children? The most.
Okay.
But on balance, more Democrats are blamed than Republicans are blamed.
Well, sure. Why not?
Right. I mean, after taking the first two games, the Yankees lost to the Red Sox yesterday. I blame Biden,
Sure.
I'm unhappy about it.
Right. I blame Hunter Biden, as a matter of fact.
He didn't.
Hunter Biden.
He didn't get a hit last night. Just look it up.
All right. Well, sure,
it's just weird, but that's how people are.
There's a lot of them, and they're weird. Okay.
But the main thing is that they're worried about what comes next. So speaking of what comes next, let's have some really interesting reporting from Shanghai on what's going on with COVID there by Naomi Wu, who writes, "My cautious thoughts on Shanghai, where she is."
They have to be cautious. She's in Shanghai.
Yes, I am self-censoring this one, she says. So this is one of those threads where those of you who need explicit statements and can't read implied meaning and nuance are going to have a tough time.
All right. Will you provide that?
If I can. I don't think it's really needed. It's pretty clear to me.
Okay. Oh, this is a great
Like, for example, things are quite bad in Shanghai.
Okay.
I don't think that needs to be interpreted other than things are worse than bad.
Yeah, that's self-censored. I mean, I don't know. That sounds pretty
China
honest.
has a long and ugly history of famine, displacement, and civil unrest. The social contract we have is basically no more of that and a steady improvement in quality of life, and we won't quibble too much about the path that takes us there. It's a really interesting insight into some basic cultural differences between China and the U.S., particularly when it comes to the food chain. And that's why this is so fascinating. The general answer to why Chinese didn't rise up against this or that is because overall there's incremental improvement. We had it better than our grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So some countries are founded in the fight against fascism, freedom of colonial powers, et cetera. China, our fight was against the humiliation of colonialism and the humiliation of poverty.
All humiliations, really, if you can help it.
Right. Plenty of us grew up with ration tickets, and before that, if you didn't fight your way to the front of the line, your family didn't eat. Oof. And now a great deal of our culture revolves around showing off that there's too much food.
Oh.
Okay, we absolutely cannot abide hunger.
I thought that was just Chinese restaurants.
Don't tweet me about how different cultures are all the same. I'm telling you, this is a big deal here. You can do a lot to Chinese. You've seen us put up with a lot. Hunger, no.
Okay.
So whether it's epigenetic legacy, I can't say, but the memory of famine is firmly burned into the Chinese collective.
Sure, I can
understand.
Right?
That's the Russians still remember the Mongols coming over the steppes, and they still fear the other. I mean, it's just ingrained. Shanghaiese will not starve in their homes. The powers that be are well aware of it, but the only reason they haven't taken to the streets is highly educated, well invested in the current system, and aware that doing so will just make things worse. Now, one of the things they point out here, and here's the fascinating part, food shipments in China are very time sensitive due to poor cold chain. Most Chinese want fresh, not frozen, not refrigerated foods.
Sure. Yep.
Massive amount of food has been lost in spoilage as trucks couldn't make timely deliveries, and few Chinese will eat canned or frozen foods in any quantity. Many rely on takeout. Overall, with the exception of rice, 80% of our average caloric intake is perishable food with a fragile, time-sensitive supply chain. So if you go to a lockdown or people get sick and then the truck drivers get sick and can't deliver, you got a problem for an enormous city that isn't exactly growing their own food, within the city walls.
Yeah. Probably not.
So we've seen even modest delays are a huge problem. And add to this, most Chinese watching Shanghai are extremely upset by the situation, but almost none I've spoken to has acted on that. And they don't stock up on dry goods. They still rely on takeout. And they don't even have a sack of rice on hand. So the fact that many Westerners have a relatively unhealthy diet of processed, pre-prepared food with an extremely long shelf life serves them well.
I guess so. We can.
She's looking at the Westerners who live in Shanghai.
We can die of diabetes.
Right, we can go over their house, and they have food.
Yeah, I mean that it's
she's
edible.
Self-censoring. Remember, you got to read between the lines here.
Yeah. Although it doesn't sound like that's something that the Chinese government would be too upset with.
I'm just saying, whatever it is, it's worse.
Oh yeah, right. That's the reminder. Okay. Well,
and then she's got another one here. So Shanghai is locked down and cases are still going up. Everybody's still in surgical masks. Local government could distribute KN95s, but they won't.
Oh.
Even though COVID was first declared airborne in China and our scientists, quote, know, end quote, it's airborne, the average Chinese still think it's droplets. So I've translated and posted infographics in Chinese. It's a big meh. Almost everybody here thinks surgical masks are good enough. KN95 is cheap and available, but maybe 1 out of 10 wear them.
So they're available.
Residents in high rises take the elevator together, collect supplies together. They don't do that in New York. There's limitations on how many people can get on an elevator.
Well, it ain't working. But
Chinese plumbing doesn't have traps, and this has made fecal aerosol transmission an issue. Cooking range hoods without roof fans are another issue. So there's basically no focus on the fact that it's airborne. And if you want a real-time, test of how that works, if you ignore airborne, what happens? Then Shanghai.
Wow. Well, they've been so careful, and I did read some of this over the weekend, and I was surprised to see, with all their I mean, when they lock down, they really lock down. And apparently, you're not allowed out of your apartment unless you're one of the designated pick up the packages and deliveries things for the whole building. You get like a block captain. But they're testing like crazy, but they're gathering everybody together in one place to test them. And apparently, you'll come out of there negative on your test, but positive for real because you picked up the virus while you were waiting in line with everybody to get tested. And I can't believe that they're making that error. I don't get it, but I mean, I don't know how else you do anything. It's very difficult to do individualized, isolated testing in, 26 million people in Shanghai or whatever it is. There's really no other method for dealing with it, but I don't know.
Well, there's things you can do, there's things you can't do. I would just step back and say, when you look at the overall picture that she's presenting to you, I'm not so sure that what the Chinese government is doing right now is exactly working well.
Yeah, and so we'll see how the Chinese
rates are going up.
deal
I mean,
with...
day by day.
Yeah.
There's and that's reported testing, and just like in the U.S., reported testing isn't necessarily the same thing as how many people actually have the virus, because
true.
The less you test, the less you know.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how the Chinese and the Chinese government react to heavy restrictions that don't actually cut down on transmission. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's one thing.
Well, as we learned today, that's a
a
problem, especially if it interferes with the food chain.
Yes, and what a delicious food chain it is with so many fresh vegetables and ingredients.
Yep.
I only wish there was not a potentially deadly respiratory disease on the other end.
Yep. So, sticking with our international theme, another story I didn't have here, but I just thought I would mention, and I don't remember whether we mentioned it on Thursday, maybe we did, is that the Israeli government no longer has a majority, and yet that doesn't really seem to matter from day to day.
Yes, we did make mention of that. And
so it still doesn't matter. It
able to
turns out a
untangle
couple of days later, not really a whole lot has changed.
Okay, well, that's an answer.
Right.
Same
But
thing.
this one is from the Times, which used to be known as the Times of London. Now it's just the Times, but I preferred the Times of London because then I'd know, oh, this is a British newspaper.
Right, they spelled everything wrong in this New York Times piece. No?
Yeah.
It's the Times of somewhere else.
Well, maybe they're Canadian. The war in Ukraine,
true.
Finland and
London,
Sweden set to
Ontario.
join NATO as soon as summer. So another success for Vladimir Putin, who's trying to keep all of those countries out of NATO. And what does he do? He pushes them to join NATO. Russia's made a massive strategic blunder as Finland and Sweden look poised to join NATO as early as the summer, according to officials. Washington is banking on the move that will stretch Russia's military and enlarge the Western alliance from 30 to 32 members as a direct consequence of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which nobody's calling the Ukraine anymore, thank goodness. U.S. officials said NATO membership for both Nordic countries was a topic of conversation in multiple sessions during talks between the alliance's foreign ministers last week. How can this be anything but a massive strategic blunder for Putin? One senior American official said. Finland's application is expected in June, with Sweden expected to follow. Meanwhile, Ukraine isn't going to join NATO anytime soon, but they may well join the European Union. Sanna Marin, the Finnish prime minister, said it was time for Finland seriously to reconsider its stance. Russia's not the neighbor we thought it was, urging the decision to be taken thoroughly but quickly. That's diplomatic speak for, oh my gosh, he's acting out the way we thought he would never do, even though we knew exactly who he was.
I mean, 100 years of diplomacy down the tubes, but whatever.
Right. Sweden's carrying out a security policy review that will finish by the end of next month, mirroring the Finnish timetable. I don't exclude NATO membership in any way, the Swedish prime minister said 2 weeks ago.
All right.
Also known as a fortnight. We don't generally use the term here.
Right. Well, they bring a lot to the table. Only NATO member would be with a bikini team, as I recall, from the 1980s.
Right. The other thing is they spell NATO, capital N, small ATO. I'm used to having it all capitalized.
Yes.
It's another way you can spot that, oh, this must be a European paper.
Right. The Times of something over there. We know where, generally.
Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, said Putin's actions had provoked a fundamental transformation of the military coalition, which would reflect the long-term consequences of the war in Ukraine. Really has galvanized NATO. If that's what his intent was, he succeeded. I think his intent was the opposite. Yes. But, that's how it goes.
Was once considered, moribund organization, something that was vulnerable to attack by an American president. Right. Actually.
And again, for those of you who have this conception of the unstoppable Soviet Union tank attacks,
I have
that ain't the way it is. NATO membership for Finland and Sweden would prompt redeployment on Putin's northwestern flank, further stretching the military, which has been badly affected by Ukraine's resistance and the prolonged conflict. They make it sound like Ukraine is chewing up the Russian military. The Russian military has been chewed up internally, And that's one of the things we've stressed on the show by looking at the experts like Phillips O'Brien. We're going to get to one of his pieces about that, maybe two of them. And so, the whole concept that Russia can do this or Russia will do that, everything about that is brought into question because they can't, they haven't, and they'll fail if they try.
Yeah. Well,
so they're going to invade Ukraine, Finland, and Sweden while they're also retaking Poland? I don't think so.
Well, if you got to rebuild the empire, you got to do all of that. And,
all at once?
Why wait? I say.
Right. Now, it's not like Europe is completely and totally united. That's impossible. There's too many countries and too many egos. From Macron, who thinks he can negotiate some sort of a solution, taking the Whittaker-Chambers approach, or whether, which to be fair, once he saw it failed, he fell in with everybody else. But, I think he still had the idea in his head that only he could somehow or other, pull this off. The latest to go to talk to Putin after talking to Zelensky is the Austrians. And so we'll see what they can do.
What?
Meanwhile, French bank Société Générale, SocGen, I guess that's what it looks like on the in the trade med, will cease its banking and insurance activities in Russia. It announced in a statement.
All right.
That move makes them the first large European financial group to leave the Russian market. So hopefully, because of all the atrocities that have been reported, Europe's getting their act together in terms of the financial stuff.
Okay. It's I'm surprised that that's the first one.
Well, they still have issues on two regards. One is oil and gas, which they haven't shut off yet. If they don't shut it off, you got to pay for it. If you got to pay for it, you need those financial institutions in place. So that's part of it. But part of it is sort of uncertainty about, how tough to be and what to lay in reserve and, relying on past instincts, which may or may not be good. And a perfect example of that, Phillips O'Brien points out in a series of tweets about Germany. Again, Germany is the one that's had the biggest sea change in terms of what they were to what they are now, but it's not exactly complete, as Phillips O'Brien points out. Here's a piece. Chancellor Scholz apparently wants to prevent coalition politicians, German coalition politicians, from traveling to Kyiv. Remember, Boris Johnson just made a big show of going there and walking the streets.
Yes, that was big event.
With Zelensky, which was a great TV event. As the Brits say, it's all show because Boris is all show, but there it is. And certainly had the effect that Ukraine wanted.
I don't know if they knew.
Scholz doesn't want that to happen with German politicians. So Benjamin Tallis writes, Scholz the brakeman internally. Greens complain he's putting pressure on them not to visit Kyiv. Now remember, the Greens are in coalition with his SPD party, and Scholz is more conservative than the Greens. But the Greens have a lot of the defense portfolios. So keep that in mind as we go through this. A German chancellor, says Phillips O'Brien, is blocking members of the German government from visiting the sites of major war crimes in Ukraine. That's a terrible choice. Who is Scholz worried about offending? And then he has a second tweet. It's almost like there are two German governments these days. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock says Ukraine needs heavy weapons. Partners have no time for excuses. So creativity should be demonstrated. That's another tweet from somebody else.
Not sure what that means.
And more on the mixed German messages, or as it might be called, the government of Dr. Baerbock and Mr. Scholz.
That's one word.
For people who know the workings of German coalition government better than me, and there's lots therefore, and that applies to me personally as well too. I don't know that much about it. Would Baerbock make such a statement without getting Scholz approval? Because Baerbock this morning, ahead of the EU foreign minister meeting, said Ukraine is in need of additional military equipment, especially heavy weapons. No time for excuses. And that's part of the problem, is that Germany says we can't send any more stuff out of our existing stockpile because it's getting low and we have to reserve stuff to be able to defend NATO in our own country. But we will send stuff off the assembly line, which sounds like a delay. So what that means remains to be seen. Maybe it's all, misinterpretation, but that's what's on the table there. So they have to really put that together. And again, as you'll recall, me being taught by the military experts is that the difference right now between the Ukrainian army and the Russian army is Russia has lots of equipment but not enough men to pull off what they're trying to do.
Right. Yeah.
And the Ukrainians have plenty of men but not enough equipment to pull off what they're trying to do. And so that goes into this whole decision. Well, if Germany doesn't send as many heavy weapons as possible, that's a big deal because they need those heavy weapons.
I guess.
Well, why can't they just, blow up tanks? Because the whole theater of war is shifting from the north, where you could pick off convoys, to the east and south, where Russians are digging in and then trying to do one of those mass formations that the Soviets were so well known for. Not that they can necessarily pull that off. That's the next discussion, but that's the plan. Okay. And somebody observed this morning, one of the real strange things about this war, different than 2014 in Ukraine, different than Georgia, different than Syria, different than anything, is that we're getting almost real-time reports of what the Russians are doing. As soon as they put together 3 cars in a row, it's broadcast.
Well, we're all attuned to convoys now.
Right. But, one of the things, for example, let me give you this thread by Phillips O'Brien, which is fascinating.
All right.
In that regard. What one picture might be able to tell us about the upcoming Russian attempt to fix the Donbass.
Let's see.
This was tweeted by Jack Detch, somebody else I follow, who's a U.S. Pentagon reporter. Russia's sending an 8-mile-long convoy of hundreds of vehicles, including armored vehicles and artillery, southbound through the Ukrainian town of Veliky, Burluk. Convoys moving about 60 miles an hour east of Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv. And I'm going to copy the image if I can and send it to you because it's important. And what they're showing is this convoy on this really skinny country road. And that's part of what Phillips O'Brien is saying here. First, and this is something we can't appreciate enough, there's no surprises in this war. Even during Desert Storm after the Cold War, there could be ways of deceiving an opponent, hiding buildups. Those days are gone. You can't hide a long logistical column from eyes in the sky, and that means no surprise assaults from the Russians or anybody else. Not only will there be no surprises, the Ukrainians should have a pretty accurate idea what's heading for them, and they can prepare.
Okay.
Interesting from a road logistical idea is where this column happens to be. It's a secondary narrow lane road.
Yeah, I see.
The Ukrainians keeping Kharkiv has forced the Russians to take a longer and more complex road route for their buildup. And looking at the map, the main Russian supply nodes seem to be in Belgorod, and there's some major roads from Belgorod through Kharkiv to Izium, from where any Russian assault would be launched, and that would be by far the best way for a resupply to be sent. But the Ukrainian strategy of keeping the Russians out of the cities makes this impossible and forces the Russians out into small secondary roads.
That's interesting.
So he points out the second part of the Ukrainian way of war is the way they view cities as fortresses, daring the Russians to come, which clearly they don't want to do and probably can't do, and fouling communications. And here's rooftop street fighting in Mariupol, brutal, horrible, effective. So looking closely at the road with this long column is using, it's really narrow. It won't be easy to maneuver. If the muddy season is here, it's longer. It'll lead to more wear and tear, vehicle wastage, tire braking. We've gone over the logistics there in terms of what kind of shape these trucks are in. And when you get to the end of an even longer trip, you get even more wastage of what it is you're trying to send.
Under the best of circumstances.
Yeah. So this is all delaying the buildup of Russian forces for a Donbass assault. If these troops are still 153 kilometers from Izium, plenty of time for breakdowns, Ukrainian attacks, and even when the Russians get there, they're going to have to reorganize.
Yes. Well, the fact that they can get these overhead shots and put them on
what's funny
social
is
media.
the next shot.
Yeah.
Okay. Looks like it's sort of a Google map kind of thing.
Yeah.
They have this military convoy route.
I see it.
Right, but then at the top they have hotel service stations, amusements.
Well, this is how much of this war is being fought with off-the-shelf software, civilian equipment, right? Everybody finding their way with Google Maps, fighting with drones bought off the shelf from Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. So
Amazing.
the Russian buildup is being hampered openly. Also, a few things else to note.
Yes.
OSIN Technical posted this video of Russian troops in the Donetsk area preparing for the assault on the Donbass. If you look 2 seconds in, it's a TikTok video. They have basically a car with a Z painted on the side.
And that's how they're doing this invasion?
Yeah. Did you see the small black civilian car marked with the Z? That's just a little sign of logistics snafu the Russians have gotten themselves into. That car's a crap box and should be nowhere near a military building.
Hey, it's my car. Yeah, let me see what I can... it's already gone. It was just a little flash.
Yeah, just a little flash, but the point is it
like
shouldn't be there at all.
Yeah.
And then at the end you see another one.
That is
so the Russian buildup for the Donbass operation, as prophesied a while back, is not proving easy.
Yeah. This really, I don't know. I mean, it's an Eastern European car, and they're all crap boxes, really. But this is a crap.
But they're not it reminds me of that old Mad Magazine piece, "Fighting Buses of World War II."
I don't know that one, but I can imagine. This is literally, I mean, this is like a, I don't know, 80s style hatchback with a Z spray painted on the side.
Right, exactly. So the Institute for the Study, I assume they stole it.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Because that's basically how it's going for the Russians. The Institute for the Study of War now agrees in wondering if it might take months for the Russians to build up the appropriate force to assault the Donbass. We assess the Russian military will struggle to amass a large and combat-capable force of mechanized units to operate in Donbass within the next few months. Russia will likely continue to throw badly damaged and partially reconstituted units piecemeal into offensive operations and make limited gains at great cost.
Very offensive.
Russians likely will make gains nevertheless and may either trap or wear down Ukrainian forces, but it's at least equally likely these Russian offensives will culminate before reaching their objectives that similar Russian operations have done at this point. U.S. DoD reported on April 8th that the Russian armed forces have lost 15 to 20% of their combat power. Once you lose 10, you're in trouble. They had a raid against Ukraine before the invasion. The statement's somewhat unintentionally misleading because it uses the phrase combat power loosely. U.S. DoD statements about Russian combat power appear to refer to the percentage of troops mobilized. That is, they're still alive, not badly injured with their units, but combat power means much more than that. U.S. Army doctrine defines combat power as the total means of destructive, constructive, and information capability that a military unit or formation can apply at a given time. It identifies 8 elements of combat power: leadership, information, command and control, movement, maneuver, intelligence, fires, sustainment, protection. This doctrinal definition obviously encompasses much more than the total number of people. And it's one of the keys to understanding why Russian forces have performed so poorly in this war, despite their large numerical advantage. It's also the key to understand the evolving next phase. So long story short, the talking of a few days ago about the Russians building up a large army and seizing the Donbass have to realize that this is very unlikely in the short term and long term as well. We're just as likely the disorganized Russian preparations that occurred around Kyiv are going to repeat themselves, he says. The Ukrainians have excellent intelligence. The Russians have major logistical problems and will struggle to build up forces, get even more support to Ukraine now, and let them build up more strength in the Donbass, and the Russians will be in for a rough ride. For the same balance, here's an article arguing Russians will have learned a great deal in the war and will be able to build up the right force and do better. I don't agree, but it's worth your time anyway. It's in The Guardian, why the battle for Donbass will be very different. To add to this thread, and the Ukrainian strategy holding on to their cities, one thing that might not get enough coverage is the huge threat that the Ukrainians in Kharkiv pose to any logistical effort the Russians make in the Donbass, because Kharkiv is so close. Ukrainians basically have a launch point anytime to try and cut supplies for the Russians, and that'll force the Russians to divert significant forces to try to contain Kharkiv, and if they don't, it's a huge risk. So, as if on cue, I give you Kharkiv region, Ukrainian military destroyed big Russian military column on the way to Izium.
Oh, well, I guess we knew that was coming.
Right.
Between
so
the beginning of the thread and the end.
He's making the point, it's not so easy. And again, I go back to criticism of New York Times and even Washington Post.
Oh.
Here's the New York Times headline right now. Click to their website. Big headline. Evidence of atrocities mounts. True.
Yes.
As Russia prepares offensive. Ukraine braces for renewed assault in the east. And then warnings about an assault, and Zelensky vows will respond. The Times and the Washington Post, to be fair to them, can only document what they see, and they're not on the ground. They're not embedded with Ukrainian forces for the most part.
Right.
They can document atrocities because pictures come out and they can write it up.
Yes.
They do a wonderful job of documenting the human toll of this war. They do a terrible job of talking about how the military campaign is going.
Yes.
Marcos Malitzis over at the Daily Kos is running a series about what's really going on from his own experience in the Army, in the artillery. And it's been way more accurate than what you're reading in the Times and in the Post, where you get the feeling that Russia's mounting, they're doing this, their professional army is doing that, they're ready, they're going to, they're unstoppable, fear them. That's, again, you read Phillips O'Brien and the other things and look and see what happened north and, in the West, and you realize it's not true. It's just wrong. And so, again, it's not that what they're reporting is inaccurate. It's the framing of it, just like with the other story we covered at the beginning of the hour. And so the framing really matters. And you need to give your readers the right impression. That's why headlines matter, because most people don't read the article. And if you do read the article, you have to get it in there that the Russians have been incredibly incompetent. They have supply chain issues. They have inferior equipment. They are poorly trained. They don't have non-commissioned officers. They can't make field decisions without Russian high command telling them what to do. 7 of the generals already been knocked out. All they need is to get the marshal and steal the flag, and they've won Stratego for the Ukrainians. None of that gets reported.
They don't have. I guess they don't have the personnel to make that analysis. It's possible.
So they don't.
I mean, you're right. So
then call it a day, and that's just not good enough.
No, that's true. It's interesting. I mean, they're built for criticizing people about avocado toast and doing puff pieces about how hard it is to get a good pool man in the
right.
Hamptons.
And despite Trump being guilty of treason, the committee can't decide whether or not to make a referral. That's what they're built for.
And they're great at all of that stuff. And, even though it sometimes leads them to covering whether or not you should put peas in your guacamole. But, hard military campaign reporting, I suppose, they've never hired for that. They could do that. And the good news is, I guess it's something they could correct.
Yeah, they got the money to hire somebody.
They're not doing it anytime soon. But, okay, maybe it's not necessary for them to do it. They could say,
well, in the meantime, it's not necessary for us to rely on them. We turn to Phillips O'Brien and other people who are doing a wonderful job.
They're probably doing the same.
Reporting the logistics and everything else.
Well, I'd be interested to see whether any of
I see, by the way,
coverage
O'Brien is writing for a bunch of other
theirs.
publications now. He has a column in some of the British papers now and again, and I see him on the air being interviewed, which is good because he knows what he's talking about. So here's another one he has, which is from April 9th, not too long ago.
Saturday.
And again, when you go through it, you get a much better idea of what's going on here. A thread of what intelligence is saying about the situation for any battle in the Donbass by referring to the U.S. Department of Defense unnamed briefing yesterday by a senior official. And the UK Ministry of Defense has been really good as well. Starting with the air war. And it remains vital that Ukraine continue contesting Russian air power as they have done. Little surprise here. Russian sortie rate is remaining constant, concentrating on Mariupol and the Donbass. Key help for Ukraine is get them more anti-air.
Mm-hmm. Okay. More anti-air weapon. Okay. Anti-aircraft. We understand that. Okay.
Right. We know how important the javelins are going to be in this knife fight that's about to occur. This is from a story. I'm not sure where, but he's quoting. It's been occurring in the Donbass, and the application of force we believe the Russians are going to make there. So we wanted to make sure that the front-loading the anti-armor stuff. And same goes with short-range air defense, because, again, right at the top of my briefing, I told you about the air activity really being focused on Mariupol. This seems from the Department of Defense, ours. And the joint force operation, basically the Donbass, that's where the preponderance of Russian strike activity is occurring, and air defense is going to be critical. And I'm not going to detail where the Ukrainians are going to apply these resources, but we're going to keep focusing on getting them what we believe and in talking with them what they believe they need in the fight that's right in front of them. So, again, everybody knows what's going on, and this is our Pentagon saying we're giving them stuff.
Okay.
State of the Russian buildup in Donbass, Phillips O'Brien says, Russia has sent some more BTGs. Those are battalion tactical groups.
Okay.
And that's their unit. Into the region, somewhat fewer than 10. The estimates, there are approximately 40 Russian BTGs in the area, and no estimate on the size of them. And not stated where the new forces come from, but seems decidedly unlikely, considering the forces withdrawn from Kyiv seem to be in pretty rough shape. Many BTGs from that area seem to have been wiped out. Others are so small they need to be combined with other groups. That's where you had a report the other day, which everybody was making fun of, which was 3 lieutenants in a tank. Basically, what you're doing is you ran out of workers at the Amazon factory, so you had management on the stock floor.
Okay.
Who've never operated any of the forklifts or any of the other machines, and you know how that goes.
Yeah, all right. You take one of these sticks, and I'll take
one of them was a lieutenant in meteorology. From that unit. So putting together these units and others is being complicated by the fact that Russian logistics, both in Ukraine and Russia itself, are still experiencing problems, and goes on to detail how. And there's also the report that Russia's trying to mobilize 60,000 more reservists, though the official seems noncommittal on how that's going, our DOD official, and whether indeed these troops can be combined in combat-worthy formations. But Russian military plans for their troops is to fix Ukrainian forces in the Donbass first and foremost, and if they can do that, maybe they'll want to head west again. But there seems to be little, if any, concrete planning for that. So quick summation, Russia might have somewhere between 30 and 35,000 soldiers in Donbass. They can attack from the air, but they don't have air control. Not clear what the logistics situation is in the region, but there are issues, and it's likely the units are below strength. And it sounds like significant reinforcement from the Russian troops withdrawn from Kyiv is weeks away, and for those reservists being mobilized, perhaps even longer. So Russia can attack with upwards of 40 BTGs, battalion tactical groups.
Yes.
Not enough to take and hold the Donbass. They still need significant reinforcement, and they're also stuck in a bit of a dilemma. The 30 Russian BTGs that have been in the Donbass can't stay forever, and they're going to suffer increasing attrition if they wait longer for reinforcement. So if they don't go soon, the ones they have will start to fail, and if they wait, then it's going to take a long time, and they'll be reinforced with BTGs that have already failed up north. And that's why he's painting a picture of what the Times sort of suggests is like there's a lot more nuance to what's going on here.
Well, there's a lot more, and there's a lot more we probably could have done if we had, say, another hour today. But then you usually have to go. Or how about if we did another hour, although we'll delay it until Thursday. So let me see. I think I have the first of the Phillips O'Brien.
I think you have them both, but I'll give you the one at the end, just to be sure.
All right. I want to be sure everybody has a chance to look at that. Thank you for jumping in. And I guess for you, it wasn't a change in plans. But to do it for an hour solid, all the way to the end, no break, that's really something. And I appreciate it. And we'll be back live on Thursday. You've given me plenty to think about. We'll bring you today's planned show tomorrow. So we'll be talking about all the domestic hot stories from over the weekend. So this is the perfect accompaniment to that, because there's so much going on elsewhere that we need to catch up with, including French pronunciations. You were all over the map today. Thank you. All right, let's wrap it up then. And again, remember that for Wednesday, if you want to collect those stories, that's a great idea always. But Wednesday we won't be live again either. But thank you for agreeing to do this. I appreciate it, Greg. And we wrap things up now and hand things over to Justice Putnam next. I don't know, though, whether the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is ready and queued up.
You've been listening to
We'll find out.
in the morning with David Waldman.
So as I said to you, Justice has to handle things on the fly today. We got an hour in between the now and the normal spot for West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Whether he surprises you and rolls that right away, well, that's up to him. As for the rest of you, and whether or not you'll tune in for tomorrow's pre-recorded show, hope you will. Thanks also to Scott for adjusting his schedule. We'll see you live Thursday.